In the unforgiving expanse of the American frontier, where mercy is as rare as rain, a young widow's wagon creaks beneath the weight of her last possessions and 3 hungry sons. Cast out by her wealthy in-laws after her husband's death, Sarah faces a choice no mother should endure: surrender her children or brave the wilderness alone. With nothing but determination in her heart and 3 small boys depending on her strength, she pushes forward into the unknown. Miles away, in the solitude of his mountain ranch, Thomas Cooper has spent 7 years healing from his own loss. Cast out by her wealthy in-laws after her husband's death, Sarah faces a choice no mother should endure: surrender her children or brave the wilderness alone. With nothing but determination in her heart and 3 small boys depending on her strength, she pushes forward into the unknown. Miles away, in the solitude of his mountain ranch, Thomas Cooper has spent 7 years healing from his own loss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's trembling fingers traced the smooth surface of the gold locket, her last precious connection to Daniel. Inside, his gentle smile looked back at her, forever frozen in time beside their 3 boys. The morning sun, usually so welcome, through the grand windows of the Morrison estate, now felt harsh and unforgiving as it illuminated the meager pile of belongings she was allowed to take. "Mama?" James's voice, steady despite his youth, drew her attention. At 10, her eldest already carried himself with his father's quiet dignity. "I've packed the boys' clothes like you asked." He stood in the doorway, shoulders straight, trying so hard to be the man of the family. "Thank you, sweetheart." Sarah tucked the locket into her dress pocket, close to her heart. Behind James, she could hear William attempting to distract 4-year-old Thomas from their grandfather's stern voice echoing through the halls. The past week had been a blur of terse conversations and barely concealed ultimatums. The Morrison family name her father-in-law had reminded her daily carried expectations. A proper widow would have gracefully accepted their offer to raise the boys in luxury while she retired to a modest cottage on the family's estate. A proper widow wouldn't insist on keeping her children when she had no means to support them. But Sarah had never cared much for their definition of proper, and Daniel had loved that about her. Mrs. Morrison. Agnes, the housekeeper who had been more of a mother to Sarah these past 5 years than her mother-in-law ever was, appeared with a bundle wrapped in clean linen. "Some provisions for the journey." Her eyes darted nervously toward the study where voices were rising again. "And there's a pouch of dried herbs for the little one's cough." Sarah embraced the older woman, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and fresh bread that had once meant home. "Thank you, Agnes, for everything. You take care of those boys, dear, and yourself." Agnes pressed something else into her, and a small leather-bound book. "For keeping your thoughts. The road ahead may be long, but you're stronger than they know." The study door slammed open. Harrison Morrison's imposing figure filled the doorway, his wife Clara hovering behind him like a pale shadow. "The wagon is loaded with what we've provided. I trust you understand this is more than generous, considering the circumstances." Sarah bit back the words she longed to hurl at him, about how Daniel had built half the Morrison shipping empire, about the promises made on his deathbed, about basic human decency. Instead, she thought of her boys. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, we'll be on our way." "Sarah," Clara's voice quavered, "please reconsider. The boys could have everything here, the best education, society, connections. You're being selfish, condemning them to hardship out of pride." "No, Mother Morrison, I'm teaching them that family means more than fortune." Sarah's voice remained steady as she gathered her skirts. "James, please fetch your brothers. It's time." The boys clustered around her as they walked down the grand staircase one last time. William, 7 years old and already too serious, clutched his favorite book of adventure stories. Little Thomas held tight to his brother's hand, copper curls. catching the light just like his father's had. At the wagon, Sarah lifted Thomas onto the seat beside her, while the older boys climbed in back. She could feel the weight of the Morrison household watching from the windows. Servants who had helped raise her children, relatives who now turned their backs, a family choosing pride over love. James spoke softly from behind her. "We'll be all right, won't we, Mama?" Sarah squared her shoulders and took up the reins. In her pocket, Daniel's face pressed close to her heart in the locket. "Yes, my darling, we will be more than all right. We will be together." As the wagon rolled through the iron gates of the Morrison estate for the last time, Sarah refused to look back. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also freedom. She had her children, a wagon of provisions, and most importantly, her dignity. It would have to be enough. The morning air carried the promise of spring, and somewhere beyond the city's reaches, a new life waited. Sarah clicked to the horses, and the Morrison estate grew smaller behind them, taking with it the weight of false prosperity and conditional love. Her hand found the journal Agnes had given her, and she smiled. Yes, the road ahead would be long, but Agnes was right. She was stronger than they knew. She had to be. Her boys deserved nothing less. The tattered map spread across Sarah's lap, caught the last rays of sunset, its worn creases telling stories of other desperate journeys. She traced the fading lines with one finger, while Thomas slept against her shoulder, his warm weight both comfort and responsibility. They had made it 15 miles from the city, 15 miles of jarring roads, worried glances at the darkening sky, and brave smiles for her boys. "James, bring me the tin of matches," she called softly to the back of the wagon. "We'll need a fire soon." Her eldest emerged from beneath the canvas cover, William close behind. Both boys had been unnaturally quiet since leaving the estate, but their eyes were keen, taking in everything about their new circumstances. James handed her the matches, then gestured to a clearing just visible through the trees. "There's a flat spot over there, Mama, away from the road, like in Will's adventure." "Books?" Sarah smiled at their partnership, James's practical nature complementing William's voracious reading. "Perfect choice. Help me guide the horses." The clearing proved better than expected, with a natural windbreak of rocky outcroppings. As Sarah unhitched the horses, she watched James organize their camp setup with inherent efficiency. He directed William in gathering dry twigs while keeping one eye on their still sleeping youngest brother, now wrapped in blankets in the wagon. "Mama?" William appeared at her elbow, arms full of kindling. "Do you think there are wolves out here?" "Not close." "To the road, darling." She smoothed his dark hair, so like Daniel's. "And we'll keep the fire going all night." The flames caught quickly, and soon the pop and crackle of burning wood provided a semblance of homey comfort. Sarah retrieved Agnes's bundle of provisions, finding fresh bread, dried meat, and, her throat tightened, carefully wrapped pieces of honeycomb. The kind woman had remembered Thomas's favorite treat. "Look what Agnes packed for us," she announced, trying to inject cheer into her voice. The older boys gathered close, and Sarah gently woke Thomas, who blinked owlishly at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where's my bed?" he asked, lower lip trembling. "We're having an adventure, remember?" William jumped in before Sarah could respond. "Like in my books, we're explorers looking for a new home." Thomas considered this, copper curls glowing in the of firelight. "Like the story about the pioneer family?" "Exactly like that." William sat beside his little brother, pulling him close. "And look, we even have honey, just like they did." Sarah's heart swelled watching them. Even as their world changed around them, her boys held together, each in their own way, helping the others cope. James tended the fire with serious dedication. William spun stories to comfort Thomas, and their youngest's innocent questions somehow made their situation feel more like an adventure than a crisis. After their simple dinner, Sarah pulled out Agnes's journal and began to write by firelight. The boys needed to see her strength, but here on these pages she could admit her fears. the dwindling coins in her purse, the vast unknown ahead, the weight of 3 young lives depending entirely on her judgment. A sudden wind rustled through the trees, and Thomas pressed closer to her side. "Tell us about Papa." Sarah set aside the journal, gathering her children close. Even James, trying so hard to be grown, scooted nearer to the fire's warmth and his family's embrace. "Your father," she began, her voice steady, "loved nights like this. He used to say that out under the stars, with people you love, was where all the best stories were told. Did he go camping?" William's eyes shone with interest. Before he joined his father's business, he worked as a surveyor. Sarah smiled at the memory. "He mapped new territories, just like we're exploring now. That's actually how we met. He got lost and ended up at my father's farm, asking for directions." "Papa got lost?" Thomas giggled, and the sound lightened something in Sarah's chest. "On purpose," he later told me. "He said he'd seen me in the garden and circled back 3 times before working up the courage to stop." As the fire settled into glowing coals, Sarah continued sharing memories, weaving a shelter of words around her children. One by one, they drifted off to sleep. Thomas curled against her lap, William using his book as a pillow, and James last, fighting to keep his eyes open until she assured him she'd wake him for his watch. Alone in the deepening night, Sarah studied the map again. Somewhere ahead lay hope. She had to believe that. She folded the worn paper carefully and tucked it away with the journal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, under a canopy of stars brighter than she'd ever seen in the city, Sarah allowed herself to feel the first stirrings of freedom beneath her fear. The mysterious frontier that had once claimed Daniel's heart now beckoned to his family, offering either salvation or ruin. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter and kept watch, the fire's warmth at her back and her children's peaceful breathing creating a different kind of wealth than the one they'd left behind. The crack echoed like a gunshot through the mountain pass. Sarah felt the wagon lurch before she heard James's shout from the back. "Mama, stop! The wheel!" She pulled hard on the reins, heart pounding as the wagon listed dangerously to one side. The rear wheel had finally given in to the brutal mountain track. Its wooden spokes splintered beyond repair. 3 days of increasingly rough terrain had proved too much for the city-made wagon. "Everyone out," Sarah commanded, keeping her voice calm for the boys' sake. They scrambled to safety as she assessed the damage. The broken wheel seemed to mock her, a physical manifestation of all her fears about this journey's foolishness. "Can we fix it?" James asked, already examining the splintered wood with a critical eye that reminded her so much of Daniel. Sarah ran her fingers over the fracture. "Not without proper tools and a replacement wheel." She glanced at their surroundings, the towering mountains casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. They had passed the last trading post 2 days ago, and their supplies were running dangerously low. William approached with the map, Thomas clinging to his hand. "There might be settlements ahead," he offered hopefully, pointing to faint markings. "On the worn paper. See these little squares?" But Sarah had already memorized every mark on that map, and she knew the nearest marked settlement was at least 3 days' travel on foot. With 3 children and what remained of their supplies, it might as well have been on the moon. "We'll make camp here tonight," she decided, forcing confidence into her voice. "The horses need rest anyway, and we can better assess our options." In the morning light, as James and William helped her unload essential supplies from the listing wagon, Thomas wandered a few feet away, watching something in the distance. "Mama, there's smoke up there!" Sarah followed his pointing finger to a thin line of smoke rising above the trees on a distant hillside. Her first instinct was caution. Smoke meant people, and people out here could mean either salvation or danger. But the approaching night and their desperate situation left little room for hesitation. "James, help me secure the wagon. William, gather firewood, but stay close. We'll signal for help." They worked quickly as the mountain air grew chill. Sarah's mind racing through possibilities. The smoke seemed to come from higher ground, perhaps a homestead or ranch. If someone lived up there, they might have tools, supplies, or at least knowledge of the closest safe harbor. As darkness crept down the mountainside, Sarah built their fire larger than usual, hoping it would serve as a beacon. The boys huddled close, sharing the last of their bread. She had been rationing their food since leaving the trading post, but now she could no longer hide their dwindling supplies from her oldest. "We don't have much left, do we?" James whispered as he helped her lay out their bedrolls. Sarah met his worried gaze. "No, sweetheart, we don't, but we're not without hope." She touched the locket at her throat. "Your father always said that the measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." "I miss him," James admitted softly, his usual stoic expression cracking just slightly. "He would know what to do. Oh, my darling." "Boy," Sarah pulled him close, feeling the tremors he tried so hard to suppress. "Your father would be so proud of how you're helping me take care of your brothers. We'll find our way through this, just as he would have." Later, with the boys finally asleep, Sarah kept vigil by the fire. The distant smoke had disappeared into the darkness, but she fixed her eyes on where it had been, offering up a silent prayer. They needed help, not just for the wagon, but for all of it. The last of their money had gone to supplies at the trading post. Their food would last another 2 days at most. And while she'd tried to hide it, Thomas's cough was getting worse in the mountain air. A nightbird called overhead, its cry echoing off the rocks. Sarah pulled out Agnes's journal, its pages now filled with 5 days' worth of fears, hopes, and memories she couldn't share with her children. By firelight she wrote, "The wheel breaking feels like an omen, but I cannot decide of what. Are we meant to turn back, to find another way? Or is this simply life's way of forcing us to stop and see something we might have missed in our haste to escape?" The children remain brave, but I see the questions in James's eyes, the worry in William's forced cheer, the confusion in little Thomas's face when his stomach growls and I have so little to give him. "Daniel, my love, if you can see us, guide us to safety. Show me I haven't led our children into wilderness on nothing but pride and desperate hope." She closed the journal as a cold wind swept down from the peaks, carrying with it the faint scent of pine smoke. Somewhere up there, someone had built a life in these mountains. Tomorrow, she would have to swallow her pride and ask for help. Tonight, she would watch over her sleeping children and pray that whoever dwelt on that distant hillside had both the means and mercy to aid a broken wagon and its broken family. Thomas Cooper lowered his spyglass, his weathered hands steady despite the turbulent thoughts coursing through his mind. 7 years of carefully constructed solitude threatened to crack at the sight of the broken wagon in the valley below. He'd spotted the smoke from their fire at dawn, too deliberate to be a wildfire, too large for experienced travelers who knew better than to draw attention in these parts. The brass spyglass, a relic from his army days, had revealed more than he'd bargained for. A woman, slender but straight-backed, directing 2 boys in salvaging what they could from a wagon with a shattered wheel. A third child, barely more than a toddler, clinging to her skirts. The scene stirred memories he'd spent years trying to bury. "Damn fool thing to do," he muttered to his horse, Ajax, who stood patient and unimpressed beside him. "Coming up these mountains with children and a city wagon." But even as he spoke the words, he recognized the desperation in their movements. These weren't pleasure-seekers or foolhardy adventurers. They were running from something. He knew about running, knew about the way grief could drive you to the edges of civilization, seeking either escape or oblivion. After Mary and their unborn child had died in the influenza outbreak, he'd fled west until the mountains themselves had stopped his wandering. Found this high meadow where the air was too thin for memories to follow. The spyglass showed him more details he didn't want to see. The way the oldest boy worked with the efficiency of someone forced to grow up too fast. The middle child consulting what looked like a map, playing at confidence for his younger brother. The mother's careful rationing of their breakfast, keeping less for herself than she gave her sons. Thomas retreated to his cabin, determined to ignore the silent drama unfolding below. He had supplies to check, fences to mend, a life of careful routine to maintain. But his feet carried him to the root cellar instead, where rows of preserved vegetables and dried meat spoke of a harvest sized for a family he no longer had. Ajax nickered from outside, and Thomas realized he'd been standing in the cellar doorway for longer than he'd meant to. The morning sun had shifted, painting new shadows across his yard. In the valley below, that family was facing their second day with a broken wagon and dwindling hopes. "Not your problem, Cooper," he told himself firmly, climbing the cellar steps. But his eyes betrayed him, drawn again to the spyglass sitting on his porch rail. One more look couldn't hurt. The scene had changed. The woman now sat alone by their diminished fire, head bowed over what looked like a journal. Even from this distance, the defeat in her posture was clear. The children were nowhere in sight, likely sent to gather firewood or forage for food they wouldn't find this high up the mountain. Thomas found himself calculating distances, resources, risks. He had tools that could fix that wheel, food that would spoil before one man could eat it all, and an empty guest cabin that hadn't seen life since Mary had insisted on building it for visiting family that never came. Mary would have been halfway down that mountain by now, he admitted to Ajax, who had wandered over to nose, hopefully, at his pockets for treats. His wife had been the kind of woman who couldn't pass a stray dog without feeding it, couldn't hear of a neighbor's hardship without organizing help. The kind of woman who'd want that cabin used for its intended purpose, offering shelter to those in need. The spyglass showed him one final detail that broke his careful resolve. The smallest boy had emerged from the wagon, coughing into his mother's shoulder as she held him close. The sound wouldn't carry this far, but Thomas could see the way it shook the child's small frame. "Looks like we've got work to do, old friend," he told Ajax, already calculating what he'd need. Tools for the wheel, food, medicine for that cough. The thought of speaking to people again, of having his quiet world invaded by strangers, sent a familiar panic through his chest. But 7 years was a long time to hide from life, and even longer to ignore what Mary would have wanted. Thomas. Cooper had spent 7 years learning how to live with ghosts. Perhaps it was time to remember how to live with the living. He packed his saddlebags with deliberate care, each item a commitment he couldn't easily take back. The weight of his decision settled around him like a heavy winter coat, uncomfortable but necessary against the cold. As he mounted Ajax for the ride down, he caught one last glimpse of the family through his spyglass. The woman had risen, shielding, her eyes to scan the mountainside. For a moment, he could have sworn she was looking right at him. Then she turned away, gathering her children close, as another cloud of dust rose on the horizon. They weren't alone in these mountains, and not. All travelers were as harmless as a broken-down family. Thomas clicked to Ajax, suddenly urgent. He'd waited long enough. The scent reached Sarah before she heard the horse's hooves. Fresh bread, still warm enough to perfume the mountain air. Her children noticed too, heads lifting like prairie dogs catching a distant signal. Even Thomas stopped coughing long enough to sniff hopefully. The rider emerged from the tree line with deliberate slowness, one hand raised in peaceful greeting. Sarah stepped in front of her children, heart pounding. The man was tall in the saddle, his clothing trail-worn but well kept. A rifle was secured to his horse, but he made no move toward it. "Ma'am," he called from a respectful distance, "noticed your smoke. Thought you might need assistance." His voice was rough from disuse, as if he'd forgotten how to shape words for others' ears. Sarah studied him carefully. Life had taught her to be wary of strangers' kindness, but there was something in his careful approach, the way he kept his movements measured, his eyes steady but not demanding, that eased her initial fear. "Our wheel," she explained, gesturing to the broken wagon. "We've been stranded since yesterday." He nodded, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone long accustomed to horses. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a cloth-wrapped bundle. The smell of bread grew stronger. "Thought you might be running low on supplies." He set the bundle on a nearby rock, close enough to reach but far enough to maintain their comfort. There's a pot of soup warming in my cabin, enough for a family. And I've got tools that could help with that wheel. James moved closer to Sarah's side, protective yet curious. You live up there? He pointed to where they'd seen the smoke. Name's Thomas Cooper. He inclined his head slightly. Got a ranch. About an hour's ride up. Been here 7 years now. William, emboldened by the man's gentle manner, stepped forward. Are there really wolves up here, Mr. Cooper? A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's weathered face. Only ones I've seen keep there. Distance if you know what you're doing. His eyes met Sarah's. But it's not good country for a family alone, especially with night coming and storms brewing in those clouds. Sarah followed his gaze to the darkening sky. The morning's clear blue had given way to heavy grey, promising the kind of rain that could turn their predicament deadly. She thought of Thomas's cough, of their dwindling supplies, of the dust cloud she'd spotted earlier that had filled her with nameless dread. The bread, Thomas added softly, as if reading her thoughts, was my wife Mary's recipe. She always said breaking bread together was the best way to know a person's character. Something in his voice, a careful pain, long tended, resonated with Sarah's own grief. She made her decision. I'm Sarah. These are my boys, James, William, and Thomas. Cooper's eyebrows lifted slightly at the youngest name, but he only nodded. The little one's got a cough. I've got medicines that might help and a spare cabin where you could wait out the weather while we fix your wagon. Mama, James whispered, tugging at her sleeve. The bread smells like Agnes's. It was such a small thing, that simple comparison to the kindly housekeeper who'd been their last connection to safety. But it helped Sarah trust her instincts about this quiet mountain man with careful movements and sad eyes. She unwrapped the bread bundle, broke off a piece, and took the first bite herself before sharing it with her children. Thomas Cooper watched this ritual of caution without comment or offense, understanding in his stance. The storm's coming fast, he observed, turning to secure his horse's reins. We should move your supplies up to the ranch before it hits. The wagon will keep until tomorrow. As if to emphasize his words, thunder rolled through the mountains. Little Thomas pressed against Sarah's skirts, but William's eyes shone with excitement. Like in my book about the pioneer family, Mama. Remember? When the ranger saved them. From the blizzard? Sarah met Cooper's gaze and found unexpected warmth there. Not pity or judgment, but something like recognition. Perhaps he too knew what it was to remake a life from broken pieces. We accept your help, Mr. Cooper, she said formally, then softened. And thank you for the bread. Mary's recipe does her credit. Something shifted in his expression at the mention of his wife's name. Pain and gratitude tangled together. He simply nodded and began efficiently organizing their evacuation, his movements suggesting long military training. As they prepared to move, Sarah picked up Agnes's journal, adding a brief note. Sometimes Grace arrives smelling of fresh bread, carried by strangers who remember what it is to be lost. The guest cabin's key was iron, ancient and heavy in Sarah's palm. Thomas Cooper had pressed it into her hand with awkward formality after helping them settle their belongings, muttering something about respecting privacy before retreating to his own house across the yard. Now she stood in the doorway, watching her children explore their temporary sanctuary while the promised storm gathered force outside. "Mama, look!" William called from a small bedroom. "There are real beds." The wonder in his voice made her throat tight. How quickly they'd grown used to sleeping on the hard ground. The cabin itself was a testament to careful craftsmanship and long disuse. Everything was clean, but carried a whisper of loneliness, as if the rooms themselves had been waiting for voices to fill them again. Sarah ran her finger along a shelf, finding no dust. Cooper had prepared for their arrival, she realized, during that hour between first spotting them and riding down the mountain. "It smells like cedar," James observed, practical as always. He was checking the windows, making sure they were secure against the coming storm. And the roof looks solid. A crack of thunder sent little Thomas scurrying to Sarah's side. She scooped him up, feeling the slight wheeze in his breathing. "Mr. Cooper said he'd bring medicine for your cough after he tends to his evening chores." "I like him," Thomas declared with a child's simple certainty. "He looks like the pictures of Grandpa Daniel in the locket." Sarah hadn't noticed the resemblance, but now that Thomas mentioned it, there was something in Cooper's bearing that reminded her of Daniel's father. The same quiet strength, the careful way of moving through the world. Before bitterness and pride had poisoned him against her, the elder Daniel had been a good man. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Cooper stood on the porch, somehow managing to look both commanding and uncertain in his own space. He carried a tray laden with bowls and a small medicine bottle. "Thought you might prefer to eat here tonight," he said, waiting for Sarah's nod before entering. "Give everyone a chance to settle in." The soup he'd promised was rich with vegetables and meat, served in heavy ceramic bowls that spoke of a woman's touch in their delicate blue glaze. Mary's bowls, Sarah realized, watching Cooper's hands linger on them as he set the tray down. "My wife loved to throw pottery," he offered quietly, catching Sarah's observation. "Said every bowl should feel like it was made to be held." The children gathered around the small table, the ordinary rhythm of a family meal feeling extraordinary in these strange surroundings. Cooper moved to leave, but little Thomas's voice stopped him. "Don't you eat dinner too, Mr. Cooper?" A complicated series of emotions crossed the man's weathered face. Sarah recognized them all: the instinct to withdraw, the pull of connection, the fear of both. She'd felt the same every time the Morrisons had extended a charity that came with strings. "Thomas," she began, but Cooper surprised her. "Been a while since I shared a table," he said, more to himself than them. "But I suppose Mary's bowls were meant for company." He disappeared briefly to his own house and returned with another bowl, settling himself carefully at the edge of their makeshift family circle. The children, with their remarkable adaptability, took his presence in stride. William peppered him with questions about mountain life, while James listened intently to every answer, filing away practical knowledge. Little Thomas simply beamed at having his namesake at the table. Outside, the storm broke in earnest. Rain drummed against the roof, but the cabin held warm and dry around them. Sarah found herself watching Cooper, the way he answered the children with simple honesty, the careful distance he maintained, the occasional flash of surprise at their easy acceptance of him. After dinner, he showed her how to measure the cough medicine for Thomas, explaining its ingredients with the expertise of someone long used to treating his own ailments. The liquid smelled of honey and herbs, and Thomas drank it without complaint. "The key," Cooper said as he gathered Mary's bowls to leave. It was hers too. She had this idea that everyone needs a door they can lock and unlock for themselves. He paused at the threshold. "Stay as long as you need to get the wagon fixed. Weather's turning anyway. Autumn comes early in the mountains." After he left, Sarah turned the heavy key over in her hands. Such a simple thing, this piece of iron, that offered more than just security. It offered choice, dignity, the right to decide who entered and who didn't. Mary Cooper, it seemed, had understood something fundamental about the human heart. In the bedroom, she could hear her children settling into real beds for the first time in days, their voices soft with contentment. Sarah slipped the key onto the ribbon that held Daniel's locket, letting both rest against her heart. Two different kinds of safety, she thought. One carried in memory, one offered by a stranger's understanding of what it meant to be lost and found. Sarah found the photograph while helping Cooper repair the wagon wheel. It had fluttered from an old manual he'd pulled from his toolbox, a faded image of younger men in uniform, their faces serious beneath cavalry hats. She caught it before the mountain wind could carry it away, recognizing Cooper among them despite the decades between then and now. "2nd Cavalry Regiment," he said quietly, taking the photo with careful hands. "Before the wars out east. Before Mary." His thumb brushed over the faces of his long-ago companions, a gesture so gentle it made Sarah's heart ache. They'd been working on the wagon for 3 days now, settling into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings belonged to chores. Cooper teaching James and William about ranch life, while Sarah tended to Thomas, whose cough was finally easing under Mary's old remedies. Afternoons were for wagon repairs, Cooper's expertise slowly bringing the broken wheel back to life. "You never mentioned you were military," Sarah said, watching him tuck the photo away. The late summer sun caught the silver in his hair, reminding her how time could reshape a person. "Some stories," he replied, measuring twice before cutting. Into the new wheel spoke, "take longer to tell than others." But something in Sarah's silence must have invited confidence, because he continued, "Lost most of those men in the photograph. Started wondering if I was carrying some kind of curse, watching people I cared about die. When Mary and the baby—" He let the thought trail off, focusing intently on his work. Sarah understood then why he'd chosen this remote place, why the guest cabin had stood empty for so long, why he'd hesitated that first day before offering help. Some wounds ran too, deep for ordinary healing. "Daniel died of fever," she found herself saying. 3 days from diagnosis to death. The boys had it too, but they recovered. I kept thinking if I'd noticed earlier, if I'd called the doctor sooner." She paused, realizing she'd never spoken these fears aloud before. His family blamed me. Not directly, but in all the little ways that wealthy people can make their disappointment known. Cooper set down his tools, giving her words the weight of his full attention. "Grief makes people cruel sometimes, especially when they're trying to make sense of something that has no sense to it." From the paddock came the sound of children's laughter. William was teaching little Thomas to feed the horses, supervised by James's watchful eye. The boys had taken to ranch life as naturally as spring colts finding their legs. "Mary would have loved them," Cooper said softly, following Sarah's gaze. "She always wanted a house full of children. When we lost her and the baby—" He picked up his tools. Again, but his hands were steady. "Sometimes I think she led you here. Sounds foolish, I suppose." "No," Sarah answered, thinking of the carefully maintained guest cabin, the pottery bowls, the herb garden still producing the medicines that had eased Thomas's cough. "I think maybe she did." They worked in comfortable silence after that, the rhythm of saw and hammer speaking its own language of healing. Sarah found herself studying Cooper when he wasn't looking, the precision of his movements, the gentleness that belied his weathered exterior, the way he took such care with every task that might affect her children's safety. As the afternoon wore on, clouds gathered over the mountains, promising another storm. Cooper glanced at the sky with a rancher's practiced eye. "We should finish for today. That wheel needs another day to set properly anyway." Sarah gathered the tools while Cooper covered their work. The photograph had fallen from his pocket again, and this time she caught a glimpse of writing on the back before returning it. "Brothers by choice, 1875. "You know," she said as they walked back toward the cabins, "Daniel used to say that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who stays when the hard times come." Cooper's steps faltered slightly. "Wise man." "Yes," Sarah smiled, watching her children run to greet them. He was. That evening, as another mountain storm rolled through, Sarah added to her journal, "Today I learned that healing isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about finding someone who understands how to walk backward with you through the hard memories, and then forward again. Someone who knows that every scar tells a story worth hearing, even if the telling takes time." The rain drummed against the cabin roof, but beneath it she could hear Cooper in his house across the yard, moving through his evening routine. No longer quite so alone, no longer quite so silent. 2 separate sanctuaries, slowly learning to bridge the space between. Them, one shared story at a time. The packet of seeds lay on the kitchen table between them, its faded paper worn soft as cloth from years of handling. Mary's neat handwriting marked the contents: summer squash, heritage, plant with the spring winds. Cooper had found Sarah, studying the empty wagon one morning, and instead of discussing departure plans, had shown her this treasure from his root cellar. Mary kept seeds from every successful crop, he explained, carefully unfolding the packet. Said each vegetable that survived the mountain winters had earned its right to pass on its strength. He paused, running a calloused finger over his late wife's handwriting. Gardens gone fallow since, but the soil's still good. Sarah recognized the offering hidden within his words. The wagon wheel had been repaired for days now, but neither of them had spoken of leaving. Early autumn winds had given way to the first whispers of winter, making travel increasingly dangerous for a family unused to mountain ways. "I used to garden back home," Sarah said softly, "before I married into the Morrisons' world of imported silks and hired gardeners." Cooper's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Might be nice to have fresh vegetables again, if you're of a mind to stay through planting season." From outside came the sound of James's voice, patient and instructive. "No, Thomas. Hold the rope like this." The boys had taken to ranch work like they'd been born to it. James spent hours with Cooper, learning about horses and repairs. William had discovered the previous owner's library of agricultural journals and adventure novels. Little Thomas followed them all like a happy shadow, his cough completely gone in the clean mountain air. "The boys would like that," Sarah said, touching the seed packet. "Growing things of our own again." They spent the morning planning the garden's resurrection. Cooper drew a rough map of the old plots in the soil with a stick, remembering Mary's careful organization. Sarah added her own knowledge of companion planting learned at her father's knee. Together they walked the overgrown space, seeing past the tangles of wild grass to the possibility beneath. "We'll need to clear it first," Cooper mused, already calculating the work. "Soil's been resting a long time, might be stronger for it." Sarah caught the metaphor in his words, thinking of how rest had strengthened them all these past weeks. The constant tension of city life and Morrison expectations had melted away up here, replaced by the honest fatigue of physical work and the deep sleep that followed. "Mr. Cooper! Mama!" William's excited shout drew their attention. He ran toward them, waving a journal. "Look what I found in the library. It shows how to build cold frames for winter growing. Could we try it?" Cooper took the offered book, studying the diagrams. "Might work. Your brother James is getting handy with tools. Between us all, we could have them built before the deep cold sets in." The way he said "us all" settled something in Sarah's chest. She watched William and Cooper bend over the journal, discussing materials and measurements, and saw the future taking shape as clearly as the garden plans drawn in the dirt. Later, as they all worked to clear the first section of garden, Sarah marveled at how naturally they moved together. James and Cooper tackled the heaviest roots, their movements synchronized through weeks of working side by side. William kept little Thomas entertained by teaching him to identify different plants, turning labor into learning, as he so often did. "Mary would have loved this," Cooper said quietly, pausing to watch the boys. "She always said a garden needs children's laughter to grow proper." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of rich earth. She left so much of herself here. In the seeds, the pottery, the medicines. It's as if she knew someone would need them someday. She had a way of preparing for futures I couldn't see. Cooper's voice held more warmth than sadness now when he spoke of his wife. "Drove me crazy sometimes, her insistence on keeping things. Just in case. The guest cabin, the extra garden tools, the children's books she bought at every trade fair." Sarah laid her hand on his arm, a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "Sometimes love looks ahead, even when we can't." That evening, Sarah added the seed packet to her journal, pressing it between the pages. Beneath it she wrote, "Today we planted more than seeds. We planted the possibility of staying, of growing, of becoming something new. The boys have put down roots here as naturally as Mary's heritage vegetables, drawing strength from the very soil that once knew." Her touch, Perhaps she did prepare all this for us. Perhaps some love is so strong it can reach beyond loss to nurture what comes after. The wooden horse emerged from the cedar block gradually, as if it had been waiting there all along for Cooper's knife to find it. He worked on it during the quiet evenings, after the day's duties were done, and the family had retired to their cabin. His hands remembered the motions from years ago, when he'd carved toys for the child he and Mary had dreamed of having. He hadn't meant for anyone to see it before it was finished, but little Thomas had a way of appearing silently, drawn by the curl of wood shavings and the gentle sound of blade against cedar. "Is it a present?" the boy asked one evening, climbing onto the porch step beside Cooper. "Suppose it is," Cooper answered, letting Thomas trace a careful finger along the horse's emerging mane. "Used to make these when I was in the cavalry. Helped keep my hands busy during long watches." "It looks like Ajax," Thomas observed, naming Cooper's favorite horse. "Will it have a saddle too?" "Thought it might." Cooper shifted to make room on the step, showing Thomas how the knife moved with the grain of the wood. "Your mama know you're out here. She's reading with Will. James is doing the accounts." Thomas leaned against Cooper's arm, fearless in his trust. "Can you teach me to make horses too?" Cooper's knife paused mid-stroke. He thought of Daniel, this child's father, who'd never get to teach his son such things. "When you're bigger," he said finally. "For now, you can help me sand this one smooth. That's safe enough for your mama's peace of mind?" Sarah found them there later, Thomas dozing against Cooper's shoulder, while fine cedar dust caught the last light like gold in their hair. Something in her expression made Cooper's heart twist with familiar guilt and unfamiliar hope. "I was going to give it to him proper," he said quietly, nodding to the nearly finished horse. When it was done, Sarah sat on Thomas's other side, her skirts brushing against the wood shavings. "He's been watching you work on it for days, tells his brothers all about it at bedtime." She touched the horse's smooth flank. "It's beautiful, Thomas." His name in her voice still caught him sometimes. When had Mr. Cooper given way to Thomas? When had proper distance blurred into something warmer? "Mary kept all my old carving tools," he found himself saying. "Wouldn't let me get rid of them. Even after, well, she kept everything that mattered. Somehow knew they'd be needed again. She must have been remarkable." Sarah's voice held no jealousy, only understanding. To love so far ahead into a future she wouldn't see. Little Thomas stirred between them, blinking owlishly. "Is it bedtime?" Past it, Sarah smiled. "Say goodnight to Thomas and thank him for teaching you about carving." The boy wrapped his arms around Cooper's neck with the pure, uncomplicated affection of childhood. "Thank you for my horse, even though it's not finished yet." After Sarah had led a sleepy Thomas back to their cabin, Cooper stayed on the porch, working by lamplight to finish the toy. The shadows grew long around him as he carved each detail with careful precision. The flowing mane, the proud arch of neck, the tiny saddle complete with stirrups. As he worked, he thought of other evenings like this, when Mary had sat beside him, planning the future with quiet certainty. "You'll need these skills again," she'd said once, watching him pack away his carving tools after their loss. Love doesn't end just because one dream does. The next morning, Cooper rose early to leave the finished horse outside Thomas's door. But when he opened his own door, Sarah and all three boys were waiting on his porch, the smell of coffee and fresh bread wrapping around them like a welcome. "We thought you might like company for breakfast," Sarah said. "The boys helped make it. James did the coffee," William reported proudly. "I measured the flour just like you taught me. And I helped," little Thomas added, though what his help had entailed remained cheerfully unclear. Cooper looked at them, this family that had somehow become his without him noticing, and felt Mary's presence like sunshine on his face. The carved horse was still in his hands, suddenly seeming too small a thing to hold all he wanted to give them. But Thomas's eyes lit up at the sight of it, and Sarah's smile held all the understanding in the world. And somehow the simple wooden toy became something more, a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what was found. "Well," Cooper said, finding his voice, "best come in then. Coffee shouldn't wait, and I believe this horse needs a proper naming ceremony." They filed into his house, bringing with them the warmth and chaos and healing he'd forgotten how to hope for. And somewhere he thought he could hear Mary laughing, that gentle, knowing laugh that had always seen joy coming long before he could. The telegram arrived with the supply wagon, a thin piece of paper that somehow weighed as heavy as stone, in Cooper's hand. He read it twice before his military training kicked in, mind already calculating distances and possibilities. Information. Received regarding Morrison widow and children. Stop seen near mountain territories. Stop grandfather requests immediate recovery of heirs. Stop legal representatives en route stop. The supply wagon driver, Ed Burton, watched Cooper's face carefully. "Came through 3 days ago. Thought you should know what with that family you've taken in. Word travels even up here." Cooper folded the telegram with deliberate precision. "Appreciate the warning, Ed. Anything else moving on the mountain I should know about?" 2 men asking questions in town, city clothes, city manners, offering rewards. "For information." Ed adjusted his hat. "Told them these mountains are big, easy to get lost if you don't know them proper." Cooper nodded, slipping him extra for the warning. After Ed's wagon disappeared around the bend, he stood for a long moment, watching the autumn wind chase leaves across the yard. From the garden came the sound of children's laughter. William teaching his brothers about the cold frames they'd built together. Sarah was in the guest cabin, which had somehow become simply her cabin over the past months. He found her at the table, mending one of James's shirts with the careful stitches she'd learned from her farming days, before the Morrisons had deemed such work beneath her. "We need to talk," he said, laying the telegram beside her work. She read it silently, her fingers stilling on the fabric. "I wondered when they'd find us." Her voice was steady, but he saw the fear beneath it, not for herself, but for her children. "How long do we have?" "Burton says they're already in town. 2 days' ride, maybe 3 if they're not used to mountain trails." He sat across from her, close enough to catch the lavender scent that always reminded him of Mary's herb garden, now tended by new hands. "What do you want to do?" Sarah looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "You're asking me? They're your children. Your life." The words cost him, but he forced them out. "If you think they'd be better off—" "No." The force of her response startled them both. The Morrisons had their chance to be family. They chose pride instead. She touched the telegram. "But I won't risk you becoming entangled in our troubles. You've given us so much already." Cooper's laugh held no humor. "Sarah, I've been entangled since the moment I saw your wagon in that valley. Truth is, I stopped being a hermit the day little Thomas started following me around the barn, asking about horses. Stopped being lonely when William began reading Mary's old books aloud in the evenings. Stopped being broken when James started calling me sir, with that same respect he gives you." Sarah's eyes shone with unshed tears. "And what about when I stopped being a Morrison widow and became just Sarah?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibilities neither had dared voice before. Cooper reached across the table, taking her work-roughened hand in his. "Then I remembered what it was to feel whole again." A knock at the door interrupted whatever Sarah might have said. James stood in the doorway, his young face serious. "Mama, Mr. Cooper, Will and Thomas saw riders on the far ridge. Using your spyglass, sir." Cooper was on his feet immediately. "How many?" 4. Dressed like city folk, like Ed warned about when he dropped off supplies. Sarah's hand tightened on Cooper's. "They're early." Or they split up to cover more ground. Cooper's military mind was already mapping strategies. "James, get your brothers. Pack only what you can't bear to leave." "Sarah, we're—" "Not running," she interrupted. "Not this time." She stood, still holding his hand. "These mountains are our home now, all of us. If the Morrisons want to discuss the children's future, they can do it here, where the boys are happy, where they've grown strong." Cooper studied. Her face saw the fierce mother who'd driven a wagon into wilderness, the woman who'd rebuilt herself far from society's expectations, the partner who'd helped bring his ranch back to life. Could be ugly. Then we'll be ugly right back. She squeezed his hand. Mary taught you to prepare for futures you couldn't see. Well, this is one of them. We face it together. James cleared his throat. Ed left something else. Papers, he said. From when you served. Said they might help if things got legal. He pulled a worn envelope from his pocket. I've been keeping them safe, sir, just in case. Cooper took the envelope, recognizing the military seals. Inside would be commendations, character references, proof of his standing before he'd chosen. Solitude. Mary had insisted he keep them too. Smart lad, he said softly. Go help your brothers now. We've got work to do. As James hurried out, Cooper pulled Sarah close, breathing in the lavender scent that had become as essential as mountain air. Together, then? Together, she answered, all of us. Sarah found the quilt pieces in Mary's old trunk while searching for extra blankets against the approaching winter. Squares of fabric told stories, a scrap of cavalry uniform, pieces of well-worn dresses, even a tiny patch from what must have been baby clothes, carefully preserved. Her hands trembled as she lifted them into the autumn light, streaming through the window. Found those my first winter alone. Cooper's voice came from the doorway. Couldn't bear to finish what she'd started. Sarah turned, holding a piece of blue calico. She was making a memory quilt. Said every scrap had a story worth keeping. He moved closer, touching a square of rough military wool. Didn't understand then. Do now. Watching you and the boys. Add your own stories to this place. From outside came the rhythmic sound of chopping, James and William preparing firewood, while little Thomas supervised from his perch on a stump. They'd worked with quiet determination since the telegrams. Arrival 3 days ago, as if making the ranch ready for winter, could somehow secure their place in it. Thomas called you Pa this morning, Sarah said softly, watching Cooper's face, when you were teaching him to feed the chickens. Did you hear him? Cooper's hands stilled on the fabric. Heard him. Wasn't sure if you'd want. He needs a father. Sarah laid her hand over his. They all do. James tries so hard to be the man of the family. William buries himself in books about adventures instead of living them. And Thomas barely remembers Daniel except as a story we tell him. And what do you need, Sarah? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with months of unspoken feelings. Before she could answer, William's voice carried through the window. Riders coming, but it's just Ed and Pastor Mitchell. Cooper squeezed Sarah's hand before moving to the window. Burton's early for supplies. Must have news. They found Ed and the pastor in the yard, their horses stamped with the mud of hard riding. James had already taken the reins, leading the animals to water with the quiet competence that made Cooper's chest swell with pride. Thomas, Pastor Mitchell nodded gravely. Mrs. Morrison. Just Sarah now, she corrected, standing straight beside. Cooper, what brings you up the mountain, Pastor? News of visitors asking questions in town, and he reached into his saddlebag, producing official-looking papers. A request for my presence, as the territory's legal authority at what they're calling a custody hearing. Cooper's hand found the small of Sarah's back, steadying her. When? They're pushing for tomorrow, wanting to catch you off guard, I expect. Ed spat off to the side, told him I'd ride up to deliver the summons, seeing as I know the trail. And I insisted on accompanying him, Pastor Mitchell added, to ensure everything stays proper and legal. These mountains might be wild, but they're not lawless. Little Thomas appeared from behind the woodpile, William close behind him. The boy took in the visitors with solemn eyes before moving to Cooper's side and slipping his small hand into the rancher's rough one. Papa? The word came naturally now. Weeks of almost saying it finally giving way. Are the bad men coming to take us away? Cooper knelt to the child's level, aware of Sarah's sharp intake of breath, of Pastor Mitchell's keen observation. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, son. That's a promise. Sarah pulled something from her pocket, the blue calico, square from Mary's quilt pieces. With quick, sure stitches, she attached it to a scrap of her old Morrison dress. Pastor, you're staying for supper. We'll need a witness to more than just legal matters, I think. The pastor's weathered face creased in a smile. Been wondering when you two would figure things out. Got my marriage registry in my saddlebag. If you've a mind to make things official before tomorrow's excitement. Cooper looked at Sarah, really looked at her. The proud tilt of her chin, the strength in her shoulders, the love in her eyes as she surveyed their unlikely family. Your choice, he said softly. Always your choice. You gave us a home, she answered just as soft. Let me give you a family, properly. William's whoop of joy startled the horses. James appeared from the barn, face splitting in a grin as Ed filled him in. Little Thomas just beamed, as if he'd known all along this was how things would be. That evening, by lamplight, Sarah added the joined squares to Mary's quilt pieces, the first stitches in a new pattern, blending what was with what would be. And if she felt Mary's approval in the autumn wind that rattled the windows, well, some things didn't need explaining. The old medical kit's leather was cracked with age, but its contents remained meticulously organized. Mary's careful labeling still clear on each bottle and tin. Cooper's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Memories of the last time he'd needed. These remedies threatening to overwhelm him, but William's feverish cough from the next room anchored him to the present. His fever's rising, Sarah said from the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight. They'd moved the boys into Cooper's house when William first fell ill, the night after their hasty wedding. Now, with snow falling thick outside and their son burning with fever, the Morrison threat seemed distant compared to this more immediate fear. Mary's wintergreen tincture, Cooper said, retrieving a small brown bottle. For fever, and there's willow bark for the pain. He hesitated. Sarah, the last time I used these medicines. This isn't then, she said firmly, taking the bottles from his trembling hands. We're together this time, all of us. A crash from William's room interrupted them. James trying to help his brother drink, little Thomas crying in confusion. They found William half out of bed, fighting shadows in his delirium. No, he mumbled, don't let them take us back. Please, Papa, don't let them. Cooper gathered the boy in his arms, feeling the heat radiating through the nightshirt. Nobody's taking you anywhere, son. I've got you. Sarah measured out the tinctures, while James hovered nearby, his young face etched with worry. Little Thomas clung to his older brother's leg, thumb in his mouth, a habit he'd outgrown months ago. Just like when we dosed the horses, Cooper murmured. To William, helping him drink the medicine. Remember how I taught you? Small sips, that's it. The Morrison men are coming, William whispered, his eyes glassy. I saw them in the snow. Sarah and Cooper exchanged glances. The custody hearing was supposed to be today, but the sudden snowstorm had made the mountain passes treacherous. They'd expected a delay, not this battle with fever instead. No Morrisons. Tonight, Sarah soothed, laying a cool cloth on William's forehead. Just family, James spoke up from his corner. I can ride to town for the doctor. No, Cooper said sharply, then softened his tone. Storm's too dangerous, even for an experienced rider. We'll handle this ourselves. Through the long night they worked in shifts. Cooper kept the fire blazing, remembering how Mary had always insisted on keeping the house warm during illness. Sarah alternated between dosing William with medicine and comforting Thomas, who refused to leave his brother's side. James maintained a quiet vigil by the window, as if daring any Morrison representatives to challenge the weather. Near dawn, when the snow had piled past the windowsills and William's fever still raged, Sarah found Cooper in Mary's herb room, desperately searching through dried plants. There was something else, he muttered, not turning around. Something she used to say about high fevers. I can't remember. Sarah wrapped her arms around him from behind, feeling the tension in his shoulders. You're not alone this time, she whispered against his back. We'll remember together. He leaned into her embrace, letting out a shuddering breath. Elderberry, she always combined it with the wintergreen for fevers. Said they worked better together like, he paused, like family. They found the elderberry tincture behind Mary's documented recipes, the glass still clear despite the years. Working together, they mixed a new dose according to her careful notes. When they returned to William's room, James had dozed off in his chair, little Thomas curled in his lap. The scene struck Cooper hard, his sons watching out for each other just as he and his cavalry brothers once had. "Like family," he repeated softly, measuring out the new medicine. By the time the storm broke 3 days later, William's fever had finally broken too. They found him awake and clear-eyed, weakly asking for one of his beloved books. The Morrison representatives, they would later learn, had been forced to return to the city when the snow made the passes impassable. Sarah added the empty medicine bottles to her journal, alongside pressed elderberry leaves from Mary's stores. Beneath them, she wrote, "Today I learned that family isn't just about standing together in joy, but in fear as well. That sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. That love, like Mary's medicines, grows stronger when different kinds are mixed together." William's fever tested more than just our medical knowledge. It proved that the bonds we've forged are stronger than any legal document or blood claim. We are family, not by law or birth, but by choice, by trial, by the simple act of refusing to let go. Cooper found her writing and settled beside her, his own journal in hand, Mary's medical notes, which he'd finally found the strength to read again. Together, they began copying them out, adding their own experiences, creating a new family record of healing and hope. The legal documents lay spread across Cooper's kitchen table like battle maps, Pastor Mitchell's marriage certificate prominent among them. The winter storm had delayed the Morrisons, not deterred them. Now, watching their sleek city carriage approach through the morning mist, Sarah felt strangely calm. The past week of nursing, William had burned away her last fears about where her family truly belonged. "Ready?" Cooper asked quietly, adjusting his formal jacket, the one Mary had saved from his military days. "They won't expect us to be married," Sarah said, touching her simple gold band, "or for you to have such respected standing in these territories. They won't expect a lot of things." He nodded toward the window where Ed Burton's wagon was pulling up, followed by 3 more from neighboring ranches. Mountain folk take care of their own. The Morrison party consisted of Harrison Morrison himself, his wife Clara, and 2 lawyers, whose city clothes already looked worse for the journey. They entered the house with the entitled air of those unused to being refused, then faltered at the sight of the gathered crowd. "Sarah," Clara breathed, taking in her daughter-in-law's transformed appearance. Gone was the society widow, replaced by a confident woman in a simple dress, her hands work-roughened and her back straight. "Mother Morrison," Sarah replied evenly. "You've had a long journey. Would you like tea before we discuss why you've come?" Harrison Morrison's face darkened. "We're here for our grandchildren, not social calls, though I see you've wasted no time in—" His eyes swept over Cooper and the assembled ranchers, securing alternative arrangements. "Mr. Morrison," Cooper stepped forward, every inch the decorated cavalry officer he'd once been. "I'm Thomas Cooper, Sarah's husband and the boy's legal father by marriage and territory law. Welcome to our home." The emphasis on legal wasn't lost on the Morrison lawyers, who exchanged glances as Pastor Mitchell stepped forward with his records. "The marriage is properly registered," the pastor confirmed, "as is Mr. Cooper's long-standing reputation in these parts. His service record, property deeds, and character references are all in order." "This is absurd," Harrison blustered. "Those children are Morrisons. They deserve their birthright, their proper education, their place in society. Those children," Sarah interrupted, her voice steel-edged, "are happy, healthy, and home. They've learned more about honor and hard work in these mountains than they ever could in your mansion." As if on cue, the door opened, and James led his brothers in. All 3 boys stopped at the sight of their grandparents, instinctively moving closer together. William, still pale from his illness, pressed against James's side, while little Thomas gripped his brother's hand. "James!" Clara stepped forward, arms outstretched. "Darling, we've come to take you home." James straightened to his full height, so like his father, in that moment that Sarah's heart caught. "We are home, grandmother. This is our ranch too now. I help Pa with the horses, Will's learning about crops and medicines, and Thomas helps with the chickens." "Pa?" Harrison's face purpled. "You dare to replace our son's memory with this mountain man?" "No, sir." Cooper's voice was quiet, but carried throughout the room. "Daniel's memory lives strong in this house. His pictures hang on our walls. His stories are told every night. His traits shine in each of his sons. We've added love, not replaced it." Ed Burton cleared his throat. "Might want to read this before you continue, Mr. Morrison." He handed over a document bearing the territory's seal, signed by Judge Matthews himself. Details how removing children from a stable, loving home, especially one with strong community support and legal standing, goes against territorial law and natural justice. The lawyers huddled over the paper while Harrison sputtered. Clara, however, was watching her grandchildren, seeing perhaps for the first time how they'd grown, how they carried themselves with quiet confidence. "They look happy, Harrison," she said softly. "Healthy. Remember how worried we were about little Thomas's cough, and now look at him." Sarah felt Cooper's hand slip into hers as Clara continued. Perhaps we were wrong about many things." Harrison Morrison was many things, but a fool wasn't one of them. He looked around the room, at the united front of mountain neighbors, at Pastor Mitchell's resolute expression, at the lawyer's warning headshakes, and finally at his grandchildren's steady gaze. "We could pursue this legally," he said stiffly. You could," Cooper agreed. "And we'd fight you every step of the way, or—" He glanced at Sarah, who nodded. "You could join us for dinner. Meet your grandchildren properly. See the life they've built here. Stay in Mary's guest cabin. It's quite comfortable. We've tested it ourselves." The silence stretched like a rope over a canyon. Then little Thomas, with a child's perfect timing, tugged at Harrison's coat. "Would you like to see the horse Papa made me? He's teaching me to carve my own when I'm bigger." Something in the old man's face cracked, just slightly. Clara's hand found his arm, squeezed gently. "I believe," Harrison said finally, his voice gruff. "We would like to stay for dinner, if the invitation still stands." The ring had lived in Cooper's drawer for 7 years, wrapped in a handkerchief that still held traces of Mary's lavender scent. He'd found himself taking it out more often lately, especially since the Morrisons' departure 3 days ago. The simple gold band with its delicate vine pattern had been his mother's, then Mary's. Now, watching Sarah teach Clara Morrison how to gather eggs without frightening the hens, he knew it was time for the ring to live again. "It's remarkable," Clara said, cradling a warm egg in her palm like it was a precious gem. "I never thought— That is, I assumed farming was beneath them, but look how capable they are." Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from society wife to rancher. Children flourish where they're allowed to grow naturally. Like Mary's garden, the mention of Mary no longer brought shadows to the ranch. Instead, her presence felt like a benediction, especially since Harrison and Clara had started asking about her, wanting to know about the woman who had helped shape the home their grandchildren now thrived in. "Daniel would have loved this place," Clara admitted quietly. "He always chafed against city life, you know. Harrison couldn't understand it, had such dreams of our son running the shipping empire. But Daniel, he was happiest when he was working, with his hands." From the barn came the sound of Harrison's surprised laugh, followed by James's patient explanation of some aspect of horse care. The old man had been spending mornings there, slowly shedding his stiff city manners as his eldest. Grandson taught him about ranch life. Sarah gathered the eggs in her apron. "Would you like to help make breakfast? William's been experimenting with herbs from Mary's garden in the morning eggs. He'd love to show you." Inside, they found William at the kitchen table, carefully measuring dried herbs, while little Thomas arranged biscuits on a baking sheet. Cooper sat nearby, working on something small and intricate with his carving tools. "Grandmother," Thomas abandoned his task to hug Clara's legs. "Are you staying for breakfast? Will's making his special eggs, and Papa says we can eat in the special room because you're here." The special room was Mary's formal parlour, maintained all these years and now opened for family gatherings. Clara's eyes misted as she smoothed. Thomas's hair, so like Daniel's had been at that age. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, darling. Perhaps," she glanced at Sarah, "perhaps your grandfather and I could stay a few more days, if it's not an imposition." "The guest cabin is yours as long as you'd like," Cooper said, looking up from his work. Mary would have wanted that. Later, after breakfast had been cleared and Harrison had reluctantly left for his morning lesson in horsemanship with James, Cooper found Sarah in Mary's garden. She was showing Clara the medicinal herbs that had helped heal William's fever. "My wife," he heard Clara say, "would never have believed I'd find peace in a garden plot." "Sometimes," Sarah replied, "we find healing in the most unexpected places." Cooper touched the ring in his pocket, then stepped forward. "Clara, might we have a moment?" Clara smiled, a real smile, not her society version, and excused herself. Sarah turned to Cooper, her hands earth-stained and beautiful. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about proper and improper ways of doing things, about how life surprises us with better paths than the ones we planned." Sarah's eyes softened. "Harrison said something similar yesterday, about how he's spent his life believing there was only one right way to build a legacy. Mary taught me that legacy isn't about maintaining what was. It's about nurturing what could be." Cooper took her hand, pressing the ring into her palm. "We did things backward, married for legal needs before I could ask properly. But I'm asking now, Sarah, not just to be the boy's father, but to build this legacy with you, to honor what was and celebrate what is, to make this ring live again." Sarah opened her hand, tears spilling as she recognized the pattern. "Mary's ring, my mother's first, then Mary's. She made me promise it would be worn in love again someday." He swallowed hard. "I think she knew somehow. About you. About all of this." "Thomas Cooper," Sarah's voice wavered. "Are you asking to marry me properly this time, even though we already are? I'm asking if you'll help me fill this house with love again, if you'll wear this ring and know that every woman who wore it before would have been proud to call you family." From the garden gate came a small gasp. They turned to find Clara watching, her hands pressed to her heart. Behind her stood Harrison, James and William, while little Thomas peeked around his grandfather's legs. "Well?" William called out. "Ah, we having another wedding? A proper one this time?" Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Yes," she said, reaching for Cooper's hand. "I believe we are." Clara stepped forward, her society manners forgotten in real joy. "Then we'll help plan it. A celebration of family, all of family, past and present, and future," Cooper added, softly, gathering Sarah close as their children, their family surrounded them in the garden Mary had planted with such hope. The photographer's camera sat ready on its tripod, waiting to capture the first formal portrait of the complete Cooper family. Sarah watched from Mary's parlor window as neighbors arrived for the wedding, their wagons and horses filling the ranch yard. Clara Morrison was directing the placement of flowers with the same attention to detail she'd once used for society galas. But now her commands were softened by genuine warmth and occasional laughter. "Penny for your thoughts," Harrison's voice came from the doorway. He'd exchanged his city suits for clothing more suited to ranch life, though he still maintained a certain dignity in his appearance. "Just marveling at how life surprises us," Sarah answered, smoothing the silk of her wedding dress, a gift from Clara that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical. "A year ago, would you have imagined us here?" Harrison joined her at the window, watching William teach his younger cousins, the Morrisons' other grandchildren, newly arrived for the wedding, how to feed the chickens without getting pecked. "A year ago, I thought I knew everything about proper family legacy," he admitted. Now I watched James handle the ranch accounts better than any city-trained clerk. See William's gift for healing growing under Cooper's guidance. Witness little Thomas blossoming in ways city life might have stifled. He cleared his throat. We were wrong, Sarah, about so many things. We all were in our own ways. She touched Mary's ring on her finger, but being wrong led us here. A knock at the door revealed James in his best suit, looking so grown up it made Sarah's heart ache. Everything's ready, Mama. Pa sent me to escort you down. Harrison offered his arm on her other side. Shall we, my dear? I believe I owe you the honor of giving you away. Properly this time. The autumn air carried the scent of Mary's late blooming roses as they emerged from the house. Cooper stood waiting by the garden arch, which Clara had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. He wore his old cavalry dress uniform, polished to a shine, with Mary's mother's wedding ring ready to join its mate on Sarah's finger. Their guests formed a circle around the garden. Ed Burton and his family, the neighboring ranchers who'd stood with them against the Morrisons, and now welcomed those same Morrisons as friends, Pastor Mitchell beaming at the fruits of his early support. But it was the front row that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. William stood tall in his new suit, medical journal tucked proudly in his pocket. Little Thomas held the rings on a cushion made from a patch of Mary's quilt, combined with silk from Sarah's first wedding dress. And James stood as Cooper's best man, his father's watch chain, a gift from Harrison, gleaming against his vest. Quite a family you've built, Harrison murmured as they walked. Different from what we imagined for Daniel's children, but better perhaps than anything we could have planned. Sarah squeezed his arm in response, too moved to speak. When they reached the garden arch, Harrison placed her hand in Cooper's with formal grace, then stepped back to stand beside Clara, who was already dabbing at her eyes. Pastor Mitchell's words washed over them like music, speaking of love that builds bridges, of families forged in adversity and strengthened by choice, of legacies that grow richer when traditions bend instead of break. But it was the children's part in the ceremony that truly captured its meaning. Each boy stepped forward to add their blessing. James spoke of honor and protection, William of healing and growth, and little Thomas, in a moment of pure inspiration, simply hugged them both and declared, "Now we're really all the way family." When Cooper kissed her, the cheers from their guests were led by Harrison's deep boom and Clara's joyful sob. Later, as the photographer arranged them for the portrait, Sarah felt the rightness of their positions. Cooper stood tall behind her, his quiet strength unchanged but no longer solitary. The boys arranged themselves naturally, James proud and protective, William thoughtful and tender, Thomas beaming with unrestrained joy. Harrison and Clara completed the group, their presence, transforming what could have been a battle line into a circle of love. "Just one thing missing," Cooper said suddenly. He strode to Mary's parlor and returned with her photograph, placing it carefully on a stand beside them. "Family is family," he said simply. The photographer nodded in approval and raised his hand. To the flash pan. "Ready now? This is history in the making, folks. The first portrait of the complete Cooper family." Sarah felt Cooper's hand tighten on her shoulder as the flash powder ignited. In that frozen moment of light, she knew they were capturing more than just faces and figures. They were capturing the very essence of what family could be. Not a rigid tree with unchanging branches, but a living garden where love could root and grow in unexpected, beautiful ways. The photograph would hang in Mary's parlor, which slowly became simply the family parlor, proof that hearts could expand, healing could happen, and love could build bridges across any divide. The deed to the ranch lay open on Cooper's desk, fresh ink glistening where he'd added Sarah's name beside his own. 1 year since their proper wedding, and the changes in the ranch mirrored the changes in their family. Mary's garden expanded into proper herb beds under William's care, the barn enlarged to accommodate James's growing horse-breeding program, and the guest cabin renovated into a permanent residence for Harrison and Clara's extended visits. Making it official, Sarah's voice came from the doorway. Little Thomas balanced on her hip, despite his protests that he was too big for such treatment now. "Figured it's time," Cooper replied, carefully blotting the ink. "Ranch hasn't been just mine for a long while." "Now!" Thomas squirmed down and rushed to the desk, standing on tiptoe to see. "Is that my name too, Papa?" "Not yet, son." Cooper ruffled his copper curls. "But someday, when you're older, this will belong to you and your brothers. Everything we've built here." Sarah moved behind the desk, her hand finding Cooper's shoulder. In the easy gesture they'd developed over their year of proper marriage, the window offered a view of their expanded world. James in the corral, working with a promising young stallion, while Harrison watched with undisguised pride. William in Mary's herb garden, teaching his younger cousins about medicinal plants during their summer stay. The Morrison grandchildren had become regular visitors, city manners softening under their ranch-raised cousins' influence. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked softly. "That first day when you saw us through your spyglass?" Cooper's laugh held wonder. "Wasn't imagining much of anything in those days, just surviving." He pulled her closer. "You brought life back to this place, you and the boys." "Mary showed us the way," Sarah said, touching the dried herbs hanging from the study's rafters. "Sometimes I think she planned it all, keeping the guest cabin ready, preserving her medicines, saving every tool and book we'd need. She always did see further ahead than me." Cooper's voice held more fondness than pain now when speaking of his first wife. "Reckon she'd be pleased to see her garden feeding both body and soul these days." A commotion from outside drew their attention. Clara's voice carried through the window. "William, darling, show your cousins how you made that salve again." Margaret's quite taken with the idea of natural medicine. The sight of Clara Morrison, her fine skirts tucked practically around her knees as she knelt in the herb garden, still amazed Sarah sometimes. The woman who had once declared manual labor beneath her grandchildren now spent hours learning William's growing healing craft. "Letter came from that doctor in Denver," Cooper mentioned, pulling a paper from his desk drawer. "The one who heard about Will's fever remedies. Wants him to consider an apprenticeship when he's older." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Her middle son had found his calling in the careful blend of Mary's traditional knowledge and modern medicine. "And James's offer from the cavalry?" "Waiting till he's 18 to decide. Wants to build up the horse breeding program first." Cooper's eyes crinkled. "Harrison's already talking about investing in the expansion." A small hand tugged at Sarah's skirt. Thomas held up a wooden horse, clearly his own careful carving. "Look, Mama, Papa showed me how and I didn't cut myself even once." Sarah examined the rough but recognizable figure. "It's beautiful, darling." "Your very first?" Thomas nodded enthusiastically. "Papa says I can help him make toys for the new baby. James says I have to make lots 'cause girls like horses too." Cooper's hand tightened on Sarah's waist, resting just above where their newest family member grew. The news was still fresh, shared first with Mary at her grave under the willows, then with their boys over a special dinner in the family parlor. "Speaking of the baby," Cooper said, "reckon we should add that amendment to the deed, make sure all our children have their place secured?" Sarah watched Thomas run outside to show his brothers his carving, saw James pause in his training to lift his youngest brother up for a better view of the horses, noticed William leaving his herb lesson to join them. Their voices carried clearly, proud big brothers already discussing all they would teach their sister. "The deed's just paper," Sarah said, touching Mary's ring. "They know their place in this family is secured by something stronger." Cooper nodded, adding the final notation to the document anyway. Some things deserved to be written down, to stand as testimony to the way love could transform a simple ranch into a home that spanned generations and healed old wounds. Outside, Clara called everyone to lunch, her voice mixing with Harrison's. Deeper tones as he emerged from the barn. The boys raced each other to the house, their cousins close behind. Sarah and Cooper lingered a moment in the study, watching their expanded family gather. "Mary would have loved this," Cooper said softly. "All of it?" "She does," Sarah replied with certainty. "She's in every part of it. The family Bible's leather cover was warm beneath Sarah's fingers as she recorded the latest milestone in its pages. 5 years had seasoned their family like well-cured wood, each ring of time adding strength to their foundation. She carefully wrote, Rose Mary Cooper, age 4, first time riding Ajax Jr. alone in the paddock, supervised by her brothers. Cooper's voice drifted through the open window, giving their daughter the same patient instructions he'd given their sons years ago. Keep your back straight, Rosie. That's Pa's girl. James, stay close to her left side. Sarah smiled at the mix of names in the Bible's family record. Cooper and Morrison births carefully inscribed. Mary's family history preserved alongside Daniel's. New branches grafting seamlessly into old roots. The past 5 years filled page after page with moments both mundane and precious. William's acceptance to medical school in Denver, where he split his time between formal training and documenting Mary's herbal remedies. James's decision to combine his cavalry commission with running the ranch's now famous horse breeding program. Little Thomas, not so little anymore, showing his sister how to carve her first wooden horse. Mama! Rose's delighted squeal drew Sarah to the window. Her daughter sat proudly atop the gentle pony, her copper curls, so like Thomas's, escaping. Their ribbons! James walked beside her, every inch the protective oldest brother, while Thomas led the pony with the same care Cooper had once shown him. William's voice carried from the herb garden, where he was explaining a poultice preparation to his latest apprentice. The Denver Medical Society had finally recognized the value of combining traditional healing with modern medicine, thanks in large part to the papers William had published about Mary's remedies. The sound of wheels on the road announced Harrison and Clara's arrival for their monthly visit. They spent more time at the ranch than in the city these days, their big house in town feeling empty compared to the lively warmth of the mountain home. Their carriage was loaded with books for William's research, new toys for Rose and Clara's latest attempt at medicinal pottery. She'd taken up Mary's old wheel with surprising dedication. "And how's my favorite ranching family today?" Harrison's voice boomed across the yard as he helped Clara down. 5 years had softened his bearing, but not his presence. He made straight for Rose, who launched herself from the pony into her grandfather's arms with perfect confidence in being caught. "Grandpa, I rode Ajax Jr. all by myself, well, mostly by myself," she added with Cooper-like honesty. "Did you now?" Harrison swung her high. "Your father was just telling me last week that you've got Morrison determination and Cooper sense. Quite a combination." Sarah added this moment to the Bible's pages, then turned to the section she'd labeled Mary's Wisdom. Here, she and Cooper had transcribed every recipe, remedy, and piece of advice they could remember or find in Mary's notes. Alongside these, they'd added their own discoveries, Sarah's observations about healing hearts, Cooper's insights about building family from broken pieces, their shared lessons about love's ability to bridge any divide. "Found something you might want to add to that," Cooper said softly from the doorway. He held a letter, its Denver postmark fresh. William's latest article was accepted. They're calling it a breakthrough in frontier medicine. Want to recognize Mary as the source of it all. Sarah made space for him beside her at the desk they now shared. She'd be proud of him, of all of them, of all of us, Cooper corrected gently, adding William's achievement to the family record in his steady hand. Sometimes I think she knew, even back then, that her legacy would be bigger than just memories. Through the window came the sound of their family's evening gathering, Clara arranging dishes made from her own pottery, Harrison deep in discussion with James about expanding the horse program, William showing his newest apprentice Mary's original notes, Thomas teaching Rose and her cousins the proper way to hold a carving knife. The scene was backed by the mountains that had first drawn them all together, still standing proud against the darkening sky. Sarah touched Mary's ring, then reached for Cooper's hand. "Legacy isn't just what we leave behind," she said softly. "It's what we choose to carry forward." Cooper squeezed her fingers, understanding as always. Together, they wrote the day's final entry in the family Bible. Today, we were reminded that family is not built by blood alone, but by the love that flows through all our veins. Mary taught us that hearts, like gardens, grow best when different. Seeds are planted together. Daniel showed us that courage means choosing love over pride. And our children prove daily that the strongest family trees are those with branches open wide enough to shelter all who seek their shade. Outside, Rose's laughter mingled with her brother's deeper voices, carrying up to the stars that had witnessed their family's beginning. Sarah and Cooper joined their loved ones in the yard, leaving the family Bible open on the desk, its pages ready to record whatever new chapters their legacy might bring.